Good morning, people. We have with us today Neil Albert, the author of the Dave Garrett series, and he is a trial lawyer in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And we are very excited to see him. We are actually touring his first book, The January Corpse, which is part of a series of what's going to be 12 books, correct?
That's correct.
And currently there are 9 that have been released, but we're going to talk about the January Corpse today. So it's great to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm very glad to be here.
So let's start with a little bit about the series. And the series is about Dave Garrett. And can you tell us a little bit about Dave?
Sure. When I started to write this series, I felt I wanted to do a private eye story. That was my goal. And the typical private eye is an ex-police officer. And
Yes.
I was a trial lawyer for many years, and I knew plenty of police officers. I did plenty of work, and I didn't feel comfortable that I could write a cop. I mean, cops are great people, but they are their own tribe, and they call us civilians. I mean, we're all on the outside of their culture. I didn't feel coming out of the box with my first book, I could write a convincing detective as an ex-policeman. And your detective is the key to the story. I mean, everybody's following the adventures of your detective. They've got to buy that character, or the story never gets anywhere, no matter how clever your puzzle may be. So I decided to use a lawyer. I know plenty of lawyers. And then you have the problem of getting a lawyer to plausibly be doing the kind of dangerous investigative things that, in a hard-boiled private eye series you get into. So, okay, maybe he can't practice law. Maybe he's been disbarred. Okay, which gets you to the next problem. How do you have him disbarred in a way where the audience isn't going to hate him? And reality came to my rescue. Just when I was puzzling over what to do, I was looking at the disciplinary records of the state Supreme Court, and there was a proceeding where a lawyer out of Allegheny County, out in Pittsburgh, had been disbarred for taking the bar exam for his wife. And that stops you. And I said, okay, here we have Dave Garrett has a wife who went to law school, who has plenty bright, but has horrible test anxiety. She gets herself completely balled up when she's ready for the bar exam. She's flunked it over and over again. And she works on him. Honey, can you please do this for me? Please, please, please. And he gets worn down and eventually says, well, against my better judgment. Of course, they get caught. And like, people are not going to think, well, they may think that he was something of a softie, but they're not going to hate him for that. It was an understandable mistake. So that was how Dave Garrett came to be. And he's not a very good private eye. He's eking out a living, is the phrase I used. He has trouble with cash flow.
Well, he's a really good guy. I mean, through the whole book, you can see that, like, ethically, even though he was like dinged and disbarred for ethics, essentially, he ethically is a really good guy.
Yes.
So for him, that must have been a really difficult thing.
Yeah, that's right. He's had to come to terms with that, and he tries to move on. But in one of the later books, someone confronts him about that, and he says, yeah, knowing like how my wife was, how suicidal she was, how frantic she was, even if I'd known this was going to happen, I would have done it anyway. It was the right thing to do.
Yeah. I think that in the book, and I don't think this is giving away any spoilers, but I think that what most struck me was when he was interviewing a resident and he wanted to give him money for the tip. And he said, instead, he was too proud for that. He said, so I just sat and talked to him because that was really what was going to be important to him. And that really struck me.
Well, thank you. That was, he's talking to an old Korean War veteran, a disabled fella who is just kind of a stoop sitter, has nothing to do all day. And that man, Dave understood that that man needed the respect of 10 minutes more of his time than he needed the $10. And I put that in, was the first interview Dave has in the whole series with anybody. And I think it shows you a little bit about what kind of a man he is.
Yeah, I think more than anything, that was what really it was like, okay, so this is the person who he really is. So then when it came out about his disbarring and what happened, it didn't like it wasn't as big a deal because you knew that deep down he was really that good guy that you were going to like really want to follow.
Well, that's the whole idea. I want people to be able to think that like you know, each story has its own puzzle, and some are more
Right.
engaging than others to particular readers. But if you're engaged with a detective, I mean, you want to
Yeah.
see what happens next.
So tell us about this first mystery and what's going on with him.
Okay. There is a law in Pennsylvania, and like in most states, that if someone disappears and is not heard from for 7 years, heirs or survivors or whatever can bring a suit to have the person declared legally dead. And if the
Okay.
judge is convinced that the person is dead and not merely missing, okay, spouses can remarry, life insurance can be distributed, what Social Security benefits
Right.
can
Yeah.
come forward, whatever. And what's happening in this case is that the underlying incident happened 7 years before. Dan
Hmm.
Wilson has disappeared under peculiar circumstances. And there's a hearing scheduled for the following Monday on whether he's going to be declared legally dead. And there's an insurance company fighting this thing tooth and nail. It's going to be a contested proceeding. And Dave Garrett is buttonholed by a former classmate of his from law school, who he does not like
Right.
very much, who the investigator who was working up the file has just fired or dropped the case, and the lawyer for the case is now begging Dave. We were such good friends in law school, Dave. To just spend his weekend figuring this mess out.
Now, okay, so this conversation happens at 11-ish on a Friday afternoon.
Yes,
And Dave has until 1 o'clock on Monday.
that's
That's
right.
74 hours to figure out something that nobody's been able to figure out in 7 years.
That's correct.
That's a ton of stuff that you need to cram into 3 very short days.
Yeah.
Um, it was amazing to me that you were able to make everything fit and make it absolutely plausible without any bit of it feeling rushed.
Well, thank you. And I'll tell you, the mystery writer who got me interested in writing is Ross McDonald. That in the golden age, Chandler Hammett, Ross McDonald, and he always had a very compressed time frame to his books. And I
Mhm.
always liked that, because the idea of like, well, we worked on the case on Tuesday and then we got busy on other things through Thursday. It's like, if this isn't important to make the detective drop everything and pound away and get to the solution, how do we expect the reader to stay with it? And I always like to write very compressed time. In my fourth book, it's so compressed, Dave Garrett does not sleep during the course of the entire book.
Well, he didn't sleep very much during this one.
And he didn't sleep much in this one either.
So, sorry. Tell me a little bit about the landscape and the setting of this is from where you are.
Sure.
Can you
Okay.
tell us a little bit about how that played a part?
Oh yes, very much. That's always fun. Okay, I'm from Oregon originally. I came to
Oh,
Philadelphia to go to law school and
okay.
lived in Philadelphia. We went to law school, and then I moved out here to Lancaster County. And I just find it hilarious how the people in Philadelphia think if you go out to the mid-state, like the Indians are still running around, with General Braddock's scalp, on their belt, and the people in Lancaster County are deeply suspicious of those goings on in the city. It's like there's this wall between the two of them. And I just find that fascinating as an outsider. But Dave Garrett has to kind of straddle both of them. he's a Philadelphia boy. He's from the Northeast, but
Hmm.
this case, the setting of the incident with Dan Wilson takes place in the mid-state near Reading, and half the book takes place in Lancaster County and in in Berks County where it happened. So he's dealing with a variety of people and who would view each other with some suspicion because they're not from around here.
Well, and I found it very funny because I'm not too far from you. So I've been to all these places, and it seems odd when you're reading it. At one point you're in the city and you're downtown, and then you're out in the country, and then there's a quarry, and then there's the cliffs, and then like all this stuff. And really the ocean's right there too. So like you could have like 30 different settings that people that aren't from this area would never realize all just completely go together, and they're so close.
Oh yeah, if you look on a map, like Lancaster is 60 miles from Philadelphia, but only on a map. In people's heads, it's very different. And the series basically all takes place. There's in the sixth book, there's a half of it takes place in Los Angeles, but that's the only time Dave Garrett ever gets out of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Everything else is Lancaster, Selinsgrove, Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
It's he works a pretty constricted geographic area, and I like to try to put some as much local color as I can into the into the book, so it's grounded in a particular place.
And I do have to be really honest. I did like track on the maps to see if that really could have happened, because I was like, I mean, I know this is a compressed time, but how could you really do that? And it all works.
Thank you.
Of course, traffic is, as you mentioned in the book, sometimes it's 2 minutes and sometimes it's 30 minutes.
Oh yes, that has never failed to fascinate me about the Schuylkill Expressway is that, and I think I dropped this into almost every book, how you never know how much time to leave to get from the suburbs to Philadelphia. It can be 10 minutes or it can be 2 hours, and it has nothing to do with day of the week, time of night. It's just, you
Yes.
know, it's busy or it's not. It just, there's no explanation.
And a matter of being 3 or 4 cars apart, even. I mean, because you can go and be traveling with somebody and you guys get there 20, 30 minutes apart, even though at one point you were right next to each other.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about the case and what happened.
Okay. Well, Dave, after some after jacking up his price, his hourly rate with this lawyer who he really doesn't like very much,
Yeah.
he decides to take on the case. And for the as you know, one of the time compression devices you mentioned is that there's an agency that has investigated the case already and then dumped it at the last
Yeah.
minute. So Dave has access to the file. So he doesn't have to start at square one. He has a not too thick, but he has about 30 pages of information on Dan Wilson, that
Mhm.
Wilson was a lawyer, about Dave's age, although they did not know each other, didn't go to the same law school. He knows the neighborhood Wilson lived in, kind of a down at the heels, but not terrible neighborhood near the art museum. That's where he goes his initial call, and he meets this Korean War veteran we mentioned. Then he stops in and sees, oh yes, and then he stops off on his way back from being in this neighborhood. He sees this bank that's very near where Wilson would have lived, and and it's this old historic building with old wood and brass chandeliers. And Dave says, I'll bet you Dan Wilson did his banking here. I mean, lawyers tradition. We love old courthouses. We love that feel of like others have been here before. And he goes in and he winds up in a conversation with the head teller. And yes, the head teller remembers Dan Wilson and says, like, it was so interesting the last time he was in, because he had he'd maintained this very large safe deposit box. And when he left the last day, he had cleaned out the deposit box. He had this bulging brief, presumably full of cash. It's like, okay, so the day he disappears, he takes out a big briefcase full of cash. Okay. And then the as he finds out a little bit later, the core circumstance is that Wilson's car was found up on a rural road in Lower Berks County, filled with bullet holes, sort of like run off the road. Another car, there's another bullet hole in the car, driver's window shot out, and blood everywhere, but no body. So, okay, so no, and the money is not found either. So what do we have here? I mean, there's what I loved about this case was the facts all pointed in the, you can do them either way. Oh, sure, this is clear evidence of a disappearance. No, it's evidence that people were after him and they caught up with him. No, you can just take it either. I love the idea that it was so perfectly ambiguous.
I really enjoyed it. Everybody's lying. I mean, it doesn't matter what scene you're in, somebody is lying in every scene, and he has to figure out who and why. Because some lies
Yes,
are just, you know,
yeah, there's very, that's a good point. There's very few people that are, well, I say the only person who's being really honest with Dave, other than the chief of police, is Dave runs afoul of the mob, and a lawyer for organized crime is very clear and very honest with Dave about his expectations. Dave understands very well how easy it will be to get on the bad side of organized crime if he investigates this case any further. I mean, that fellow was being pretty straight with Dave in his own way.
well, I mean, but you have to wonder in Dave's position, he has to wonder, okay, how truthful is he being? How much of this is really accurate? And where is he leading me? And why?
Well, certainly the threats are real. As far as certainly the organized crime representative knows things he's not telling Dave, and that's he drops a few hints. But yes, by and large, almost all the information Dave gets turns out to be unreliable, or at most it's true only in part. And there's I can't count the number of times in the story in which witnesses tell Dave, yes, I know I told you story A, but story B, this is the real truth. And then a little later on, well, there's story C that really explains it a little more now that you mention it. Yeah, there's a lot of multiple level, pecking away at the truth.
Yeah, yeah, it was really interesting. I found that a lot of your reviews say it's very reminiscent of a Holmes or an Agatha Christie kind of a book. Is there a reason for that? Did you do that on purpose?
Well, Agatha Christie, that's an interesting comparison. My writing is a homage to Ross MacDonald. I think
Mhm.
I like to think of myself as writing more standard, sort of hard boiled vein. I mean, I have a detective who he's a little bit of a softy, but the action in the book is the kind of thing that Hammett and Chandler would be at very much at home with. It is interesting you mentioned Agatha Christie, because I wrote this book as a reaction to reading an Agatha Christie book.
Oh, really?
I read a Miss Marple set in a village in the Cotswolds, I guess, and
Hmm.
reading along, enjoying myself just fine. And then about halfway through the book, it said, Susan saw Nigel kissing Barbara in the belfry. And I realized, okay, I have lost so track of who the characters are in this book. I have met the entire population of an English village. I don't know if who's brother and sister and wife, or is Susan upset about this? Is Nigel? And I realized what she's done. She's dealt out so many cards, you have no idea where to look next for the killer. And I thought, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to write a book with the absolute minimum number of characters I could. And then when I was partway through that, I realized, well, that creates its own problems, because you've got to hide a bad guy somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not, if there's only a few cards on the table, it becomes.
Yeah. I don't disagree that it's very much like Christie's books, just because you really have to pay attention.
Oh
There's a
yes.
lot going on, and there are a lot of people. I mean, not too many, but enough that you really need to listen to what they're saying and what they're doing to get to the conclusion.
Yes, and I, without giving anything away, I like to think people finish the book, assuming they haven't figured it out by the time they get to the point where the solution is revealed, that they will go, there was something back in chapter 3. Yeah. And then there was something else in chapter 7.
Yeah,
I read it and didn't
yeah,
understand why he did that.
yeah. I got to the end and I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But just those
Well,
couple things that were like, oh, okay, okay. Oh,
my very first editor, Janet Hutchings at Walker, who bought the book that got me published, she
mhm.
told me exactly that, because I had said to her, yeah, I thought I had too many clues in here, and I because you don't want people to catch it too early, and I was thinking
Right,
of
yeah.
taking some out, and she said, no, 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 this is a weird enough, ending. They're not going to get it, and the people will be even more. The more clues they have, the readers will love it even more when they get that moment at the end.
Yes. Yes, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Um, so you obviously enjoyed writing this book.
Oh yes.
Um, but which of the books that you've written was your favorite to write?
Oh, okay. I'm going to say the absolute favorite was, well, most writers will say the most recent book, but yeah, September Wars. Okay, the series is, for the benefit of the viewers, each book, it's a month of the year. January Corpse is followed by February Trouble, and so on. September Wars,
And they're all standalones,
yes. Oh, well,
correct?
yes,
Okay,
they're yeah. Oh, yes. You can pick up September Wars without having read any of the books, and all of the information you need to follow it will be there. There will
that's
be,
great.
some references to earlier things, but no, you can pick up September absolutely and read it as a standalone. But that was a book where Dave is a Vietnam vet, and
Hmm.
which is and he has post-traumatic stress syndrome, which kind of comes out for the further you get into the series. And September Wars, he's at a reunion of the evacuation of Saigon in 1975. The copters on the embassy roof and all of that. And
Yes.
he's at a reunion with the vets from there, and a crime arises out of that reunion, and that was a book that was important to me to write. That was I enjoyed that one a lot. It spoke a lot to who Dave is as a person. It explains him, and that one I would have to say it's the book where he gets to be himself the most, I guess.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. I do have a question though. Now, the first book, January,
Yes.
was written in 89,
Yes.
and you are just now releasing September or October.
Yes. The way it worked is this. Through a couple of different houses, Walker and Dutton, I published commercially the first 6 books up
Yes.
through the last one that came out commercially was in 96, Tangled June. At that point, I was really stuck with what to do next. And I had just bought a horse farm and I took up horseback riding. And
Uh-huh.
I decided to kind of put the series on hold. So it sat for a long time, and then I decided to revive it. And I had an idea for July after about 20 years. And then I realized you can't just bring out July if the first 6 books are like out of print and people can't get them. People don't want that. So I had this small project of I needed to reissue the first 6 books so everything could be together, and that
Mhm.
involved reviewing them, doing some rewriting. The book that you have there is something of a rewrite of the original book. It's probably 95% the same. You'd have hard to see it, but there's a little polishing and a little bit of updating and going on. But so yeah, so all those books were brought out on Amazon, And then I did, okay, July and August and now September. And October is in about its fifth draft. So that one will be out probably sometime by the end of the year.
That's so exciting.
It,
Um,
it is really fun to live in that world that long and see how relationships change with people. I don't deny it. I enjoy it.
Now, all of these books take place in the same year of Dave's life, right?
That is correct. 1990. And so Dave doesn't have, a cell phone like we understand them now.
Yeah.
He has access at times to a car type phone, those old kind of phones. But no, he's stuck with 1990 technology, and yeah, and I thought about this long and hard. I thought about, well, when I'm bringing out the July book, shall I update it to 2022? And I thought, no, the cure is worse than the disease. I decided we'll just leave it in 1990. It's 1 year of continuous action, and it's just 1990. So there it is.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. But was it difficult to write like from now to, I mean, essentially it's a historical mystery now because you're
You
writing it.
asked a really good question. It's right. The historical part of it is not hard. I just have to kind of Google to make sure, was this available in 1990? That's easy.
Yeah.
The hard part is, okay, Dave Garrett is, like 40 years old.
Mhm.
When I was 40 years old, it was easy to write a 40-year-old. I'm 73. It's just not as easy to get into the mindset of the physicality of a 40-year-old as it was when I was that age.
I can
I like to think
imagine.
that doesn't show in the writing, but I mean that's something I have to work at.
So that's probably one of the hardest parts right now of writing.
Yes, yeah, that's it. I have to think about life in terms like, yes, well, he can stay up all night, he can do this, he can do that. It's like, no, I need a nap.
All right. Well, this is so interesting. Now, I do have a question. I read somewhere in a bio something about you fox hunting,
Yes,
but you apparently are the only person that has never been injured at least once.
in my hunt, yes,
There's
yes.
got to be a story there.
Yes, well, I had good horses and I was very lucky. And by the way, just so your readers know, we don't kill the fox. We chase the fox. We don't kill the fox. So yeah, I want to get the animal cruelty to one side right off the bat. Yep. I was 47 years old, and my wife at the time had she persuaded me to buy a horse farm because she was a fox hunter, and I knew nothing about horses. And I was scared of them, like you are if you're not around them.
Yeah.
And but then for about 2 years, I was kind of around the farm, and the horses were there, and she was dealing with them. And one day, I had this sort of gestalt, like, well, this is crazy. This is like living in Colorado and not going skiing. I should try this. And
Yeah.
so I, signed up for a lesson and got on the horse. And oh my God, the first time I threw a leg over a horse while I was still at the mounting block, I said, this is good, but if I were galloping, it'd be even better. I was so bitten right away. I can't talk about it. Yes. And 6 months later, I went on a no jump fox hunt. And a year later, I was had a new horse and I was jumping. And I said I had some real good horses and I was very lucky, and I stayed home on some of the really slick days. And unlike everybody else in my hunt, I never broke a leg or had any other fractured skulls or any other souvenirs.
Oh my goodness. Wow. So are you still doing that?
No, no, I've kind of aged. Well, I aged out and the horses aged out. But I have a lot of fond memories and pictures on my website. Anybody who wants to visit, of me taking horses over ridiculously large fences. But no, that's you know, there's a time your reflexes slow down to the point where Roy Rogers said that there's a moment when there's a time that comes when you fall off, you don't bounce, you splatter.
Yeah.
Sort of
You don't
says
want
it
to ride
all.
that long. All right. Well, thank you for visiting with us today, Neil. Can you tell readers where they can find your books?
Okay, the books are available through Amazon. If you can visit my website, neilalbertauthor.com. If
Okay.
you can see my whole website there. I have a blog dedicated to Ross McDonald. And
Mhm.
if you want to buy my books through that, you can click on the books there. It takes you directly to the Amazon link. And there you go.
Well, thanks so much. And I'll put all your links in the show notes and everybody can check you out.
Oh, it's been a
Thank you so
pleasure.
much. And we can't wait to see your next book.
Thank you, Gene.
We'll talk to you soon.